Ready? Bismillah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi wahdahu. والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. As we continue in this tremendous book entitled Shaykh al-Fatwa al-Hamawiyyah al-Kubra by the great Imam Abu al-Abbas Taqi-ud-Din Ahmad ibn Abd al-Halim ibn Abd al-Salam ibn Taymiyyah al-Harrani al-Dimashqi rahimahullah, who died 728 after the migration of our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. With the time now 7:10 p.m. Wednesday, May the 31st, 2023, which agrees with the Hijri calendar, where it's currently the 11th of the Qa'dah on this evening of Wednesday, the year 1444 after the migration of our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. We were discussing the matter where Shaykh al-Islam brought the statement of those scholars, or rather the so-called revered scholars, the people of Sufiya, where they were respectable with them, not with the people of Sunnah, but rather with them. You'll find how Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah utilized their statements as an argument and a proof against them, to the point where you'll find that if they were to embrace the statements of these great scholars, from them was Fudayl ibn Iyad. He was from Ahl Sunnah, but you'll find that there were other people of Tasawwuf who had statements that agreed with the Salaf. And you'll find that Shaykh al-Islam cited their statements, meaning he conveyed them in order to utilize that affair as a proof against them. So, keep in mind that Shaykh al-Islam, we talked about the statement he conveyed upon an individual or from the scholars of Sufiya who they revered. From them, if you look in the book, his name was Ma'mar ibn Ahmad al-Asbahani. Ma'mar ibn Ahmad al-Asbahani. You'll find that Shaykh al-Islam called him Shaykh al-Sufiya fi hudud al-mi'at al-rabi'ah fi biladih. The Shaykh al-Sufiya within the time frame of what? The 4th century in his city. We talked about how the people of early Sufiya, how their aqidah, meaning those who were given pure knowledge. They were given pure knowledge. That you'll find that their statement agrees with the people of Hadith and the people of the truth. You'll find that it says, as we mentioned last class, and this is where we stop. We'll just read it quickly so we can be upon one page so everybody can be caught up of where we are. قال فيها وأن الله استوى على عرشه بلا كيف. I'll just read it quickly what translated means. He says that Allah ascended above the throne without asking how it is, nor knowing how it is, nor without any resemblance with the creation, nor with any false interpretation or distortion. And ascension is known, it's ma'qul, or it's ma'loom. It is known. How Allah did it is not known. So you'll find that the statement of this individual from Ahl Tasawwuf agreed with the statement of the great Imam Malik. And that tremendous statement of when that individual entered upon Imam Malik, and he said to him, how did Allah ascend? Until we know the athar where Imam Malik, Imam Dal Hijra al-Usbuhi, that he started to sweat profusely due to the great magnitude of that statement or that question that he asks. So you'll find that his statement is exactly the statement of who Shaykh al-Islam cited from the people of Sufiya, this individual named Ma'mar ibn Ahmad al-Asbahani. He said that the ascension of Allah is known. How Allah did it, not known. وَالْكَيْفِ فِيهِ مَجْهُولٌ. And that Allah is separate from His creation, separate and distinct from His creation. And the creation are separate and distinct from Him. And we talked about this last class, that Allah is not without any hulul, without Allah becoming united or within the creation, nor mixed with them, nor attached to them. Rather, you'll find that He is what? Separate and distinct from them. And that He's al-Wahid al-Ghani. We talked about this last class, so we'll kind of speed through it. As far as the statement itself. It says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Sami'un Basir, Alim Khabir, Yatakallam, Yarda, Yaskhat. He said that Allah, He's all hearing, all seeing, all knowledgeable, all aware. He speaks, He's pleased, becomes angry, He laughs, He's amazed. He will manifest for His servants on the day of resurrection, laughing. He descends every night to the heaven of the dunya, how He wills, to the end of the what we mentioned last class. Because this is what we mentioned, we want to move forward. Like, so that's in brief where we stop. We talk about, and we keep emphasizing the affair of dissension, or certain characteristics we touched on in regards to what? Applying these principles that you'll find that Shaykh al-Islam used as an argument of those who ascribe to these type of so-called ways or methods of Sufiya, and that the early revered scholars of Sufiya from amongst themselves were upon an aqidah that what? Agrees with the aqidah of Ahl Sunnah in regards to the names and attributes of Allah, and they did not believe in hulul. Notice that this was a statement of a Sufi, and he was upon that tariqah, and he did not believe that Allah merged with the creation, or that the creation merged with Him, or become unified with Him, or that Allah became unified with the creation, or the creation became unified with Him. All of the atrocities you'll find with the belief of the people of Tasawwuf from today. You'll find that they believe that Allah became Ayn al-Khalq, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became the creation until the point where you can worship everything. You'll find that some of them say that, until the point you'll find from the head of Tasawwuf, his name was who? Ibn Arabi al-Hatimi al-Ta'i, where he said in his line, Al-Abdu Rabbun, wal-Abdu Rabb, Al-Abdu Rabbun, wal-Rabbu Abdun, wa layta shi'ri man al-Mukallaf. He said that Allah is the Lord, the creation is the Lord, and the Lord is the creation. So how can the creation be burdened with anything? What do you mean? Meaning the fact, why would I have to now do any prayer if I reached a certain level? Because I become Allah, and Allah has become me. And we become what? Merged. Until the point you'll find of those who are engrossed in the great atrocities of Sufiya, where they worship anything, because everything is what? Allah, and Allah is what? Everything. For those affairs, you'll find that this was an individual, Ma'mar ibn Ahmad al-Asbahani. He didn't believe that. And Shaykh al-Islam was citing his statement in order to show those who follow so-called Sufiya, this is your revered scholar saying what I'm saying. He doesn't believe in any of that nonsense that Allah is merged with the human being. But the human being is merged with what? With Allah. And like we talked about, that Sufiya of today has, if not, have a mixture of all the different types of polytheistic beliefs. For example, you'll find that Sufiya has become mixed with Buddhism. Oh, you want to turn the fan on? Hold on. You'll find that Sufiya has become mixed with Buddhism. You'll find that Sufiya has become mixed with Jainism and Hinduism and Sikhism. You'll find it became mixed with all of that. And that the affair of Buddhism and those type of ideas, you'll see the heavy influence within Sufiya. You'll find it. If you study and contemplate on the statements of Tasawwuf, you'll see the heavy influence from those other ways upon Sufiya. From Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, and lights, all of it became mixed until you'll find Sufiya became heavily influenced by those statements and those beliefs. That's the reason why we heavily warned the Muslims not to be Sufi. Why? Because of the great atrocities that these people are involved in. However, back in the early days, there were from amongst them who had pure knowledge, and from them, as we mentioned, was Fudayl ibn Iyad, rahimahullah. And we'll talk about that because this statement is going to come. And those who are close to the people of Hadith, in which, like we said, Shaykh al-Islam was using their statement here as a proof against them. So keep that in mind. So you'll find that from them that did not believe any of that nonsense. They didn't believe Allah was mixed with the creation. They believed that Allah was above. They believed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not attached to the creation, nor is the creation attached to Him, or any of those matters. Right. So it says, as we talked about last class, the affairs of, you'll find that what the Salaf were upon was not the affair of ta'wil, was not the affair of distorting the meanings, as we talked about this last class. This is where we stopped when we were speaking about the ayat which comes in Surah Al-Imran, the first ayat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first page. In Surah Al-Imran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in His book, وَالَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ وَهُنَّ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ فأما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله. Right, everyone? This is where we stopped last class. We said, once you recite the ayah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Surah Al-Imran, ayat number 5, if I'm not mistaken, Surah Al-Imran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in His book, He's the one that has revealed to you the book. From those verses are muhkamat, and others mutashabihat. As for those who have sicknesses in their heart or disease in their heart, they follow the mutashabihat in order to cause fitna and to seek its what? Interpretation. No one knows its interpretation, or its meaning rather, except Allah. Stop at that ayah right there, except Allah. Based upon that recitation, when you stop, when you say no one knows its ta'wil except Allah, meaning from those affairs that no one knows except Allah, is how His characteristics are. How they are, and the true nature of how they are, and the affairs connected with the characteristics of Allah, and His dissension, or His actions, and from them is His dissension, ascension, Him coming on the day of resurrection. No one knows that except Allah. All those affairs, brothers and sisters, Allah is not like the creation in His characteristics at all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends, and He does not have the necessitations of the creation. Is it clear what I'm saying, everyone? What do I mean by that? For example, if the human being was to descend from one place to another, that it would necessitate that he left off the place where he descended from empty, and that it became vacant, and that place where he descended to became occupied. That's only for the creation, not for the creator. As I said, a qa'idah before, a principle, and I mentioned this in a lot of my classes. Understand this point and apply it to all the characteristics of Allah. That qa'idah, that principle is lawazim sifat al-makhluq la tastalzim sifat al-khaliq. Lawazim sifat al-makhluq la tastalzim sifat al-khaliq. What the creation needs for their characteristics does not necessitate the same affair when it comes to Allah with His characteristics. What do I mean by that? For example, the human being needs a tongue and lips to have the characteristic of what? Speech. They need to have a tongue. They need to have a mouth. They need to have all these lawazim, needs, or these type of characteristics of other necessities they need to have in order to have that characteristic. For example, the creation has necessities of eyes in order to have the characteristic of what? Sight. Those lawazim, those necessities only befit the creation, and it does not necessitate for the creator to have those same lawazim to have those characteristics. Is it clear what I'm saying or not? For example, in order to have the affairs of anger, the characteristic of anger for a human being, he needs, or he has those affairs of becoming upset where his blood starts to boil, or his temperament becomes changed, and things and affairs pertaining to that. His blood starts to boil, or it has ghalayan al-qalb, where the boiling of the blood within the heart starts to change and become a little raised. To have the characteristic of anger. That lawazim. Those are lawazim, the blood and all that are what they call lawazim. The lawazim meaning the needs that you need to have that characteristic. Does not necessitate that with what? With the Creator. To have that characteristic. Is it clear what I'm saying? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also. When we descend from one place to another, same thing. You leave that place vacant, and when you land, or that place that you arrive to becomes what? Occupied. That does not necessitate with Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can have the characteristic of one where He descends, and it does not negate that He's not above anymore. Is it clear what I'm saying, everyone? Those affairs only apply to the creation, not the Creator. Allah can have the characteristic of dissension, the characteristic of coming on the day of resurrection, and at the same time still being above the creation at the same time. And in addition to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can descend in a manner of who He wills, in a manner of how He wills, no matter what time it is, in what country. For example, the time now is late at night, 3 o'clock in the morning. And on the other side of the planet, they think, based upon the fact that they're in the daytime, that is maybe 6 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, does that affair apply to now, to them or not? Where the other side of the planet is the evening, or it's the last third part of the night, and the other one isn't. That affair is similar to what we just mentioned now. That necessitates for the creation, not the Creator. The Creator can descend when He wills, in the manner of how He wills, and what time He wills, and to whom He wills, meaning to the salat dunya, to the heavenly dunya. All of those affairs you'll find that Shaykh al-Islam answered in a book entitled Sharh Ahadith al-Nuzul. I have it right in my office. I was going to bring it, but I forgot. It's right next door. The explanation of all the narrations of Allah's descension. Shaykh al-Islam mentioned all of these different types of ambiguities and answered them. He said just because one is on one side of another land, or another land, and on the other land, does not negate the characteristic of dissension at all. And one saying that just if that's the case, that means you resemble Allah with the creation, based upon the fact that the creation needs to be in one time zone and can't be in another, where that necessitates that at that particular time you can't do it at the same time. All those affairs apply to the creation, not the Creator. Is it clear, everyone? It applies to the creation, not the Creator. And you'll find that Fudayl ibn Iyad is going to bring some great statements, tremendous great statements, inshallah. What's going to come, Shaykh al-Islam is going to bring some very beneficial statements from the Salaf. From them, they're going to say, no matter what your mind can imagine, no matter what your mind can fathom of how great Allah is greater than that. Is it clear what I'm saying? What I said? I'll say it one more time. No matter what your mind can imagine of what you could come with, the greatest thought of something, of it being the greatest and the most beautiful and the most glorified and the most venerated and the most greatest of thing your mind could think in your mind, Allah is greater than that. Is it clear? G. So you'll find that as we keep going, we said that the affair of pertaining to nuzul, or that the affair which is a Surah Al-Imran, rather, we talked about this. The affair of Al-Imran, we stop at the ayat that Allah is the one that knows His ta'weed. Meaning, from the affairs of the true reality of His names and characteristics, no one knows that except Allah. And that falls under the meaning of the ayah, which is the Surah Al-Imran, as we mentioned a moment ago. From those affairs that no one knows its ta'wil, the meaning of it, no one knows how the characteristics of Allah are, or the true reality of how they are, the true nature of how they are, except Allah Himself. And that to say that what is intended is something else, rather it's the angel that descends, for example, at the third part of the night, or it's his command that descends, that's qawlan ala Allah bila ilm. That's saying upon Allah what you have no knowledge of. And it's a statement of dhann. It's a statement that's speculative, meaning suspect. And that's not permissible to say upon Allah of something that is what? Doubtful, or something that's considered speculative. All those matters are what? Forbidden, and they are highly what? Prohibited. That you say, for example, that Allah doesn't descend, it's His angel. Well, it's not Allah that descends, rather it's His what? Command. We already talked about this in last class. And we talked about the rebuttal against this nonsense, because there's no way that a command from Allah descends and speaks words by saying, who will invoke me and I will answer him. And at the end of the day, you'll find that they mention to say, if you said it's the command of Allah that descends, where does the command descend from? It descends from who? Because the reason why they're trying to negate that it's not Allah that descends, in order to what? Negate that Allah is not above. But at the same time, when you now explain the affair and now clarify in a manner that rebuttals what they're saying, you say that the command descends from who? The angel descends from who? And does the command of Allah or the affair of Allah, does it speak words such as, who will seek my forgiveness and I'll forgive him? Who will invoke me and I will what? Answer his invocation. Who will ask me and I will give it to him? The command doesn't speak words. And we know that the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends every night, every day. The hadith specifies that this affair takes place when? The third part of the night. The command of Allah descends all the time, all day and all night. So that's another affair. To let you know that this type of what? This type of distorted meaning is unacceptable. To say it is Allah's command that descends, and in addition to that, His angel, as we said. It's not Allah's angel that descends in the third part of the night that will claim worship of Allah, or will claim worship of Himself by saying, who will invoke me? There's not an angel that will ever claim rububiyyah and uluhiyyah of Allah, where they will command the people to what? Worship Him. Where they will say, who will answer me, and who will invoke me, and I'll answer their invocation. That's worship. Would the angel claim to have uluhiyyah of Allah? Or claim the people and tell them to worship Him? All of these affairs are what everyone negated, rejected, and refuted. So let's keep going. Rather, you'll find, as we said, the affair which yaqeen, and which you'll find was considered surety, is what the salaf were upon. And that is the true ijma'. That is to what? Narrate the narrations of the characteristics of Allah upon its apparent meaning. That is what the pious predecessors were upon. And you'll find that the affairs pertaining to distorted meanings, they'll say that that's a consensus. However, these individuals need to what? Relook at their information and find that this is not a consensus. Rather, you'll find that the affair of ta'wil, or what they call falsely interpreting the text, this affair came after the development of so-called rhetoric and philosophy and logic, which came, like we said, after the three virtuous generations that the Messenger of Allah praised. It came later, and it was invented by what they call al-Khilafat al-Abbasiyah during the time of the Khalifat al-Ma'mun al-Abbasi, during the time of Imam Ahmad. That's when it became what? Famous. And that's when it became what? Prevalent and widespread amongst the people, the affairs of distorting the characteristics and the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying, no, what is intended is not Allah's descension, or what is intended is not Allah, He Himself descending, rather than something else. This affair came later, and this was something that was not known with the people who the Messenger of Allah praised in those first three virtuous generations, that He commanded the people to what? Follow, and that the best of His ummah were from amongst them. You'll find that Ahl Ilm, that they say that the ijma' or the consensus goes back to number one, the Sahaba. That is the ijma' that was mundabit, that was accurate and precise. The ijma' of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een who came after them, and the atba' Tabi'een, where you'll find that the ijma', the consensus at that time, was mundabit. It was precise and accurate. And that the ijma' was upon what, everyone? The ijma' was not upon ta'wil. Rather, you'll find the ijma' is upon dhamb ta'wil. You'll find that the consensus was dispraising and condemning, falsely distorting the text or the names and the attributes of Allah. That was the ijma'. But anyway, you'll find that the ijma' of the tabi'een, for those who followed the Sahaba, the affair that they were upon was what, everyone? To narrate the text how it came upon its apparent meaning. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above the throne. In all the matters you'll find, as we said, that the Sufi mentioned that Shaykh al-Islam had what? Conveyed of his statements. That the Sahaba were upon us. Then the Tabi'un, and like we talked about, that this type of consensus, that it was what? Substantiated by the Kitab and Sunnah. And by the accurate mind, meaning the mind that has not been tampered with by philosophical affairs or affairs that's connected with logic, that meaning that the actual aql, the intellect that has not been tampered with, that was left in its proper, purest form, also that testified to this affair. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is He Himself that descends, and that He Himself is above the heavens. All of this is a consensus in which the Sahaba were upon. And if the affair was so called, just as they say, ta'wil, those matters, as we said, would have been conveyed. And like we talked about, what will now hold back the message of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hadith of Nuzul, for example, that Allah, it's not Allah that descends, it's something else. If that was the affair, as they mentioned, don't you think the message of Allah would have conveyed it? Especially in the most important and vital of all matters, which is the belief about their Lord, of where He is and what takes place in that particular time. What will hold the message of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam back from saying that it's not Allah that descends and it's His angels? It's not Allah that descends and it's His command. If that was the case. But it wasn't the case. The message of Allah said clearly, Yanzilu Rabbuna subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our Lord descends. Said it clearly. Our Lord descends. Fi thuluth al-layl al-akhir. The third part of the night. So, what we said, during the time of Imam Ahmad, when these type of distortions and these type of false interpretations came, it developed during the time of what they call Al-Asr al-Abbasi. Al-Asr al-Abbasi, meaning during the Khilafah of Al-Abbasiyah, when Imam Ahmad, where he was tested, and like we talked about in the history of what the great Imam al-Maqrizi mentions, عندما حُورِبَ مِنْهَجُ السَّلَفِ, that the methodology of the pious predecessors was made war against during the time of Ma'mun, until the point it became not known. Rather, a majority of the people became ignorant of it until it became hidden in some of the corners of the dunya. Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He brought about an individual to renew for the people or restore for the people the affair of their religion and their belief. But during that period of time, you'll find that the belief or the proper belief or the affair of Orthodox Islam pertaining to Allah's dissension and those affairs of Allah being above, that those beliefs became very what? Hidden. Rather, you find that we said it became ignorant in regards to the majority of creation in a particular time, due to the fact that the people of innovation had become huge in number and more dominant, and that the Salaf, like we said at that particular time, or the Minhaj al-Salaf or the Aqeedah of the Salaf, that it became in a manner where the Aqeedah became very what? Hidden and weak. Those are matters Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Ummah, the one who will restore it. It brought to the Ummah who will restore it, and from them was an Imam Ahmad, as we mentioned. So now it became restored. And in the matter, like we said, those who are upon deviant ideologies from the Mu'tazila, the Asha'ir and the Maturidiyah, their affairs were newly invented. And like we said, their type of so-called weird ideologies and the so-called philosophical beliefs and all those matters that were newly introduced and newly invented and incorporated in the religion, it all came about at which time, everyone? Ahd al-Abbasiyyin. So keep that in mind. That the Muslims before the Ahd al-Abbasiyyin were not upon that. They did not know anything of distorting Allah's names and attributes and changing the meanings of them. They were not upon that affair at all. In which the message of Allah, like we said, clarified in the hadith, the best of my people is my generation. That those who follow them, they are the ones who had that pure belief that we were commanded to follow. And these three virtuous generations did not know affairs of tahrif or ta'wil. They did not know any affair of distortions or what? False interpretations of Allah's names and attributes at all. So those are the affair, like we said, you'll find that those who traverse the correct path, as you'll find in these days and times, in which you'll find that the abundance of people, where the Sawad al-A'zam, the great number of what the Messenger of Allah sallallahu and the Salaf used to call as Sawad al-A'zam, the great blackness, what they mean by the overall majority of the people. That the Sawad al-A'zam in the early part, or the early centuries, was the people of Sunnah. And then later it became switch. That the Sawad al-A'zam started to become now the people of what? Deviant ideologies and deviated practices and newly invented practices. Until the point where you'll find that the majority, or the vast majority of the Muslims became scum like the scum of the what? Of that foam that forms upon the sea, which the Messenger of Allah had informed in the Hadith Thoban, due to the fact that they abandoned what was correct and they embarked upon dunya, and they brought about affairs that made the quality of the Muslims become very weak until they just became mere quantity. And that's what you'll find from the great statements of Ibn al-Qayyim, where he said, rahimahullah, in a very profound statement, where he said, لا تغتروا بكثرة الهالكين. Do not be fooled by the majority of people who are destroyed. Do not be fooled or amazed by the abundance of people who are destroyed. Because there's a lot of people who are embarking upon ways of destruction these days. And he said in another part of the statement, وَلَا تَسْتَوْحِشُوا بِقِلَّةِ السَّالِكِينَ. And do not find yourself to be lonely by the small amount of people who embark upon the correct path. Meaning the people who embark upon staying firm upon what's correct. It's upon every individual to what? Make sure that you're doing what is right, regardless of what you see the majority of people doing. عَلَيْكُمْ الْجَادَةِ وَإِنْ كَانَ السَّالِكُونَ أَقَلَّ. He said, upon you is the correct path and cling to it, even if those who embark upon the path are small in number. And this type of what they call al-aqaliyah, and this type of less number who've now become spread out in the dunya. And like we talked about, if they were added to the great number during the time of those who are upon the truth in the early centuries, before the development of what they called ilm al-kalam or tasawwuf, meaning early centuries before these newly invented ways and methods came of logic and rhetoric and philosophy and tasawwuf. If the people of the truth were added to them, of course, then they would be added on to the great number or vast majority. In the past, of course, meaning the people of today, even though they might be small in number, but in the past, like as we know, when they were greater in number, if they were all to be brought together, then they are still added to what they call a Sawad al-A'zam, meaning in the past, with the majority of those who are upon the truth were more number, that the people of today, if you stick to it, then the Messenger of Allah sallallahu will give that, of course, have given glad tidings to those who will remain firm, and they will be added to that great number who was the vast majority of the past. Because we know that the Messenger of Allah on the day of resurrection, he alayhi salatu wasalam will be the majority of the prophets as far as the number of followers, as we know the narration. But however, due to the fact of how the affairs have become switch, and the affairs became very weak these days, for one should not find loneliness within himself due to the small amount of people who embark upon what's correct. Rather cling and stick to what's right, regardless of what you see and regardless of what you witness. And the affair, like we said, of the glad tidings for those who stand firm upon what is right, that you will be added to those who the Messenger of Allah had gave the reward from those who came earlier. And that those people will be gathered together on the day of resurrection, and they will be raised together. Even though they were what? Even though they lived at different times and in different centuries. So, based upon the small amount of number, even though you came later, will not affect you that you'll be gathered with them on the day of resurrection, where they were more in the earlier centuries. And that's the point we're trying to make. Is it clear, everyone? طيب. So you'll find, as we said, كثرة القائلين يقول في هذا الوقت ليس بميزان والإجماع ما رواه الإمام الأوزاعي. As we said, that the ijma', the consensus, is what the great Imam al-Awza'i mentioned in that statement, where he said, we and the tabi'un were plentiful in number. And before them was the Sahaba. He said, Kunna wa tabi'un mutawafirun. Because you know the Imam al-Awza'i was from the scholars of the tabi'i. He said, me and Kunna wa tabi'un mutawafirun. We were the atba' tabi'in, and the tabi'un who we took our knowledge from were huge in number. And we used to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was what? Above the throne. And we have narrated the narrations of these characteristics as they come, upon its apparent meaning. That was the ijma' of what they were upon. The scholars such as we mentioned, Al-Imam al-Awza'i, Al-Imam Malik, Wal-Thawri, Wal-Layth ibn Sa'd, and other than them. Until the point you'll find that those who are upon deviation even brought a statement of the Salaf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the individual name Al-Liqani, which is a book which is famous with the people of Asha'ira, which is called Jawharat al-Tawheed, where he spoke a statement of truth, and Allah knows best there would be an argument against him. He said in the statement, وَكُنْ كَمَا خِيَارُ الْخَلْقِ وَكُنْ كَمَا كَانَ خِيَارُ الْخَلْقِ حَلِيفَ عِلْمًا تَابِعًا لِلْحَقِّ فَتَابِعِ الصَّالِحَ مِمَّنْ سَلَفَ وَجَانِبِ الْبِدْعَةَ مِمَّنْ خَلَفَ فكل خير في اتباع من سلف وكل شر في ابتداع من خلف. This statement was made by Ash'ari, that Allah made him speak a statement of truth, and Allah knows best would be a what? A proof against him. He says, be where the most greatest of creation, or those who were chosen of the greatest creation, were upon. The people who were entrusted with pure knowledge, and they followed the truth. So follow the salih from those who are salaf. Follow the righteous from those who came in the past, from your predecessors. And stay far away from innovated matters and beliefs from those who came later. For every good is in following the salaf, and every evil is in the innovated of those who what? Came in the later generations. A statement was made by Ash'ari, made this statement. He made this statement. And you'll find that, like we said, it's a proof against him. How could you make a book with services, the Aqidat al-Ash'ariyah, and then at the same time bring a statement in the poetry that's profound that refutes what you are upon? Which to let you know, like we said, it is abiyat of poetry that everyone should what? Memorize, understand, contemplate it, and practice it. Can you close that window for me? So you'll find that it says in the statement, وَكُنْ كَمَا كَانَ خِيَارُ الْخَلْقِ. The poet has said, stay or be as those who are the most greatest and most prominent of creation were upon. He's talking about the companions, and those who came after them, who followed them from the tabi'un. The thing we want to now just summarize and keep it concise, as all of that brings us to one conclusion. Which conclusion is that, everyone? That ta'wil is madhmoom. That distorting Allah's names and attributes is highly condemned and is forbidden. Forbidden. It's not just haram. It's haram, it's impermissible, and it's forbidden. It is a statement upon Allah without any what? Knowledge, which is the greatest of all affairs. That none of them were upon that, and that the message of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam in the narrations saying that the dissension of Allah is a true dissension. It is not something that is metaphorical or something that is considered metaphoric or allegorical. It's not real, or what is intended is something else, or Allah's command descending or His angel descending. All of these affairs are forbidden. Is it clear, everyone? And whoever now distorts the meaning of dissension by saying it's like we said, Allah's angels or command, it's a statement of Allah upon him without any knowledge. And he's saying a statement that is dhanni, means speculative and suspect. And it will not bring any type of what? Surety. And that is the danger of these statements upon Muslims. That once they start to adopt them, what will come as a result is that it will bring doubt in the heart of the Muslim who believes this. And that's the reason why these affairs are extremely dangerous. And that's the reason why we teach it. Because you'll find there are a lot of Muslims out there today who listen to people that bring these type of statements and become affected by it in a great way until the point that they fall into doubt. And they fall into conjecture about their religion, because all these type of affairs brings doubt. And when doubt comes another type of affair, which is what? Weakness in your religion. And what's the next step after that? You're apostate. Is it clear, everyone? From the innovative beliefs brings confusion. Confusion brings doubt. Doubt brings what? Weak iman. And weak iman brings what? Apostation. Is it clear, everyone? For you'll find, as we said, the dissension of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a characteristic of His action. It's connected with His will. He does it when He wills, and Allah informed us when He does it at the time He does it, subhanahu. None of these affairs, like we said, is acceptable to say. And if the affair was clear with the message of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, He would have clarified it. Because the affairs of Aqidah, the message of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam clarified it in the most clearest way. And what would have prevented the message of Allah from saying clearly that no, it's not Allah that descends at that time, it's His angel. Nothing would have held the message of Allah back from those matters. However, He clearly mentioned and said it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. In addition to what we'll bring in the other book, inshallah, in the next class, the book pertaining to the ahadith, or explaining the hadith of Allah's dissension, which is a book that Shaykh al-Islam had written in order to refute those who came with different types of ambiguities to confuse the people. So that is in order to what? Just to sum up what this individual from the Tasawwuf mentioned. So let's keep mentioning, or let's reiterate what he said. Let's read it quickly. So he says, ثم قال الشيخ ونزول الرب إلى السماء بلا كيف ولا تشبيه ولا تأويل. So let's go back to what he said and read it quickly. He said the dissension of Allah, or of the Lord, to the lower heaven without asking how it is, or trying to find out how it is, or asking how it is. Nor does Allah's dissension resemble the dissension of the creation, nor do we distort the meaning. Now listen to what he says at the last part of the statement. This individual named Ma'bad ibn Ahmad al-Asbahani, from the people of Sufiya. He said, whoever denies the dissension of Allah and distorts its meaning, he's a mubtadi' dal. He is a stray innovator. He's a stray innovator. This is the speech of Asbahani. And he said, وَسَائِلُ الصَّفْوَى مِنَ الْعَارِفِينَ عَلَى هَذَا. And some of the nusakh he said, وَسَائِلُ الصُّوفِيَّةِ مِنَ الْعَارِفِينَ عَلَى هَذَا. He said that the rest of As-Safwa, meaning Sufiya, of those who are arifin, are upon this way. Meaning, the great esteemed scholars from the people of Sufiya who they glorify. He said, this is what they're upon. Meaning those who truly was given pure knowledge. Because we know, in most cases, the Mashaykh al-Turuq of Sufiya is ignorance. And rather they call to ignorance. And they'll try to now keep their followers and their murideen in a state of ignorance. And that's part of their way, is to be ignorant. And you'll find that we said from amongst them in the early times, in the early centuries, from them was Fudayl ibn Iyad, who was given great ilm, who was given great knowledge of hadith and knowledge of the creed of the Salaf, was Fudayl ibn Iyad, and also Junayd. And similar to them, this statement who we're mentioning, his name was Ma'mar ibn Ahmad al-Asbahani. And similar to those who Allah had granted pure knowledge, you'll find that this is the affair that they were upon. And this is who Shaykh al-Islam was given what? Was given as a way to establish the proof against these people of what they're upon of great error. So let's keep going, let's stop. وقال الشيخ الإمام أبو بكر أحمد بن محمد بن هارون الخلال, from the great A'imma of Hadith, Abu Bakr ibn al-Khallal. That you'll find that Abu Bakr ibn al-Khallal was from Kibal Ashab al-Imam Ahmad. He was from the great students of Imam Ahmad, until the point where he has a book called As-Sunnah by Ibn Khallal. Then you'll find لا تنسى ركعتين تحية المسجد. You'll find that he says في كتاب السنة. So Shaykh al-Islam is talking about a book he's called, what everyone? As-Sunnah. Abu Bakr ibn Khallal. Also from those great students of Imam Ahmad is Abu Bakr al-Athram. قال حدثنا إبراهيم بن الحارث العبادي. Ibrahim ibn al-Harith al-Abbadi, whose his name was Abu Ishaq al-Abbadi. We'll talk about that next class. Imam Ahmad also used to respect him. And he used to what? Praise him greatly. And he used to utilize him in affairs that others he would not what? Give them the task for. To let you know that he had a specific place with Imam Ahmad. So, Ibrahim ibn al-Harith al-Abbadi قال حدثنا الليث بن يحيى قال سمعت إبراهيم الأشعث. Ibrahim ibn al-Ash'ath was close to Fudayl ibn Iyad. Rather, you'll find that he used to service him. Ibrahim al-Ash'ath قال أبو بكر صاحب الفضيل قال سمعت الفضيل بن عياض. Fudayl ibn Iyad is another one like we talked about. We said was from the scholars of Tasawwuf, right everyone? We said that Fudayl ibn Iyad was from the scholars of Tasawwuf. Yes, he was. Even though you'll find, as we mentioned, it said of what he was given of great knowledge of hadith. And some of them narrate, they say that he made tawbah from al-Turuq al-Sufiyah. Fudayl ibn Iyad, you'll find that he mentions, it says that this individual, Ibrahim ibn Ash'ath, was from those who used to service Fudayl ibn Iyad. He said, I heard him say, meaning Fudayl ibn Iyad, who was a Shaykh. He said, it's not for us to have the false impression. لا نتوهم ليس لنا أن نتوهم في الله كيف هو. It is not for us to have the false impression as it pertains to Allah how He is. That is because Allah has described Himself that He is قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. That Allah is one, meaning nothing is similar to Him in His essence nor in His actions. Allah is Samad, meaning that Allah is the one who the creation directed their worship to, and that they intend to please and stay away from His anger until the other affairs that we'll clarify later. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. Allah does not give birth, nor was He born. Nor was He born. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. And nothing is similar to Him, meaning that all those affairs of the creation, there's nothing similar to Him, subhanahu, nor do we negate His characteristics or what He's affirmed for Himself, as we'll talk about, nor do we resemble them with His creation. All those affairs will give the what? Details of the next class, because I just want to read this and then stop. He says, فَلَا صِفَةَ أَبْلَغُ مِمَّا وَصَفَ بِهِ نَفْسَهُ وَكُلُّ هَذَا النُّزُولُ وَالضَّحِكُ وَهَذِهِ الْمُبَاهَاتُ وَهَذَا الْاطِّلَاعُ كَمَا يَشَاءُ. He said this dissension, Allah's laughter, and that Allah bragging with the creation or with the creation, meaning during the time of Hajj, especially what's going to happen in about another 4 weeks from now, this Mubaha, which we'll talk about. And Allah being acquainted with the creation, or looking at the creation, and that Allah descends, and that Allah, if He wills, He descends, and if Allah wills, He laughs, and if Allah wills, He looks at the creation, and if Allah wills, we do not now try to have the false impression that this is how He does it, or this is how He does it, or we know how He does it, or we ask how He does it. This is an affair you'll find from the great Jahmi. They said this statement, and we'll stop here. They're from the Jahmiyyah, who says this very uglified statement. They say, I disbelieve in a Lord that goes from one place to another, and that place that He left off became vacant. He says, if they say this to you, then say this: I believe in a Lord that does what He wills. Is it clear, everyone? This statement I talked about a couple of minutes ago. We refuted it. We said the lawazim sifat al-makhluqin la tastalzim sifat al-khaliq. Is it clear, everyone? Lawazim sifat al-makhluqin la tastalzim sifat al-khaliq. The affairs of what they call, first the word intiqal, غير وارد عند السلف. The word movement or haraka. Stay away from it. It's words of confusion and it will bring doubt. And it was a word that was not used from what? From the Salaf. Stick to the words that comes in the what? The Kitab and Sunnah. That's number one. Number two, the affairs of what's pertaining to the creation. As we mentioned and said, the creation needs certain affairs for its characteristic. Those needs does not what? Necessitate for the characteristics of the Creator. Allah does not need anything to have His characteristics. Rather, the creation needs lungs, a heart, blood, tongue, lips, in order to have the characteristic of speech, anger, amazement, or pleasure, or what have you. That's from what they need to have that characteristic. Allah does not need anything of those affairs to have His characteristics. Is it clear, everyone? And like we said, the affair of Yazul and Makanah, that we'll talk about later on, inshaAllah. Those matters of what we said, the matter of what becomes vacant and what becomes occupied, and all those matters we'll clarify next class, inshaAllah. But stop here. We mentioned it said the Jahmi that he says that I disbelieve in the Lord, أنا أكفر برب يزول عن مكانه فقل أنا أؤمن برب يفعل ما يشاء. That I believe in the Lord, that He does what He wills. We'll stop here. Any questions about the lesson, anyone? Surah Ali Imran, ayah number 7. First page. Ali Imran. Any questions about the lesson? So alhamdulillah, I think everything was clear. Those affairs of ta'weel and tahrifat or ta'wilat fasida, we talked about this previously, maybe last year. The ta'weel comes in different meanings. There's the praiseworthy meaning, and you have the condemned, this forbidden meaning. The forbidden meaning is to distort the meanings of and the names and the attributes of Allah. The ta'weel of what means tafsir, we talked about that. That's correct. But in regards to the names and attributes of Allah, they're talking about distorting the meaning by saying it doesn't mean that Allah what? Descends, rather means something else, or it's not Allah's face, rather means something else. Or for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speech, meaning He doesn't really speak. He speaks inward speech within Himself. And it's not actually word or speech that's done with words or letters. to all the other nonsense that they say. That is just considered a type of what? Speculative, weird type of belief, in which you'll find that they try to flee away from, and the so-called claim that they try not to what? Resemble Allah to creation by glorifying Him. So they say, we want to glorify Allah, so we distort the meanings by saying, no, He doesn't have these attributes. Rather, what's intended is something else. All that is what? Incorrect, rejected, and greatly forbidden for the Muslims to what? Adopt these type of meanings. Because these affairs, like we said, the ultimate result in the end is that will cause what? Doubt. Because number one, as we said, the first step is confusion. The second step is doubt. The third step is weak iman. Then the fourth step could possibly be what? Apostation. No, we'll stop here. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. What time Maghrib come in? 8:28 now.